we'll just pivot over to Blair. I thought we could carry on this topic, but I promised I'd talk about it because I thought that video was quite interesting. You'd interviewed him and you put it up, or you cut it and you put it up, and there's some interesting debate because for some people he's a kind of, I mean, he's definitely the best communicator. He's incredibly, I think he has real star power. And I've been to Brussels summits. I was based in Brussels once upon a time, where he was the star. I mean, all the other Euro politicians kind of looked up to him. I mean, he strode in and he's tall and sort of, and the foreigners, let's say he's popular in Sweden, the Swedes' idea of the perfect Englishman, progressive and posh, you know, and modern or whatever. But sorry.
No, you're right. He's amazing. Yeah. He is a big, tall, strapping guy.
Yeah.
And he has such charisma and style. I mean, I'll never, two things, as I say in the interview, I don't think it's in that clip, but the full interview is on my YouTube channel. And I talk about the story where I was sitting with one of my mentors some years ago, who was a big supporter of Labour and Tony Blair. And I told Tony the story, how I was sitting in the drawing room with my mentor and the phone rang and he picked it up. He said, hello. He said, I'll have to call you later. Put it down, turned to me. And he said, that's Tony Blair. And I said, well, you hung up on Tony Blair to talk to me? And my mentor said, everything in its place, Roger. The other thing I remember about him is when I interviewed him, Pelle, I walked into the room with my crew and stood there waiting. And then seconds later, the door opened. Tony came in and he went, oh my God, I don't have a tie. Shall I run upstairs and get a tie? And I said, no, shall I take mine off? And he said, no. And then we both sat down. I mean, he has so much charm.
And then we get to the but, or do you feel that there are no buts about Tony Blair? I didn't get to the point where you stated your own sympathies or lack of sympathy for him. Do you think he was a good or a bad leader for the UK? Because there are arguments both for and against.
I think that he was generally a good leader for the UK. He certainly, I think, New Labour was a very valid and valuable thing. I'm not one of the people who ascribes to the fact that he dragged us into this terrible, horrible war and the rest, because actually around that time, I was spending a lot of time at the White House. A friend of mine was one of the senior people in the White House, and I visited him and spent time in the Oval Office and went out partying with the West Wing crowd. And I am of no doubt that Saddam Hussein did have weapons of mass destruction that he was probably hiding in Syria. So I don't think that, and Bush, you see the people around Bush, the man's no fool. So I think that Tony probably didn't mislead us. I mean, I'm going to get a lot of people disagreeing with me about this. Yeah, but I thought he was okay. I'm more pro him than I am a con. But the main thing I would say about Tony Blair is that he is a man who has spent his life never telling anybody what they didn't want to hear.
Well, I mean, this it's interesting. Let's just talk about his comment. I mean, it's no point in. I was opposed to the Iraq War, but we both know the arguments for and against, and that would take an hour or something. I mean, but I thought, I mean, when you just isolate what you put in your YouTube, he talks about self-conforming groups of left and right. I mean, that's actually quite true, isn't it?
Sure.
We all brainwashed by our own tribe to an extent, and then we have media who just feed off that. I mean, the New York Times, but even Fox News, although more on the right part of that argument, I mean, but we have to have some self-awareness, I think, that we're also being fed tribal myths in a way.
Totally.
But yeah.
And that was 7 years ago, and it's even truer today.
Yeah, I was doing research for a book I wrote on the Cold War, and it's striking to read the British press from the 1980s. They're so much more adult than they are today, They're far less emotional, It's not this whiny sort of tribalism, but it's quite factual, actually, I mean.
Absolutely. Well put.
Anyway, I think we've got our next guest, but we'll keep you on for a few minutes because we've been setting him up. But do you think? I mean, he was very pro globalization and saying it was a force for good, and he's talking about openness. But I'd like to say, I mean, I'm living in Sweden, as you know, and I don't think. I mean, Sweden's culture has been completely changed by mass immigration from cultures that are much poorer and different from Sweden. I don't think it's done Sweden much good, and I know that the Swedish leadership were disciples of Tony Blair and they believed all that globalization stuff. I mean, I think that this idea, of course, we want to be open-minded and mix good ideas, but we don't all have to be like a Manhattan drawing room. You know, I mean, it's fantastic if you can have hubs of globalization like London and New York where you meet brilliant people, but you don't have to turn your local industrial suburb into a kind of mixing pot, because it won't turn into a melting pot. It'll just be like a cooking, like a souffle or a baking dish where the ingredients don't come together. And that's what's happened in much of Sweden, you know. And I think that there's been a net loss, for instance, of trust, which is so important for Sweden. And Swedes have lost their culture. But anyway, I think the guests come through now, so we'll have to have you on next time to talk about Blair and other things. And great to talk to you, Roger. Thank you very much. This is Pelle and Norath Taylor Show on TNT, and we've got another guest coming up. Thank you.